A puppy was about to be euthanized until one vet read the tag on its collar. She thought it was just another sad day in a crowded shelter, until she spotted one small detail that changed everything. That tag wasn't just a name, it was a warning. And behind it lay a secret powerful people wanted buried forever. Suddenly, saving one trembling pup meant risking her career, and maybe even her life. Because what she uncovered wasn't just about a dog, it was about corruption, lies, and a hidden truth no one expected to see. Why was this puppy marked for death? What danger is unleashed when one person refuses to look away? And how far will the powerful go to silence the only witness that can't speak? I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Type it down below. And while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the sterile examination room as Dr. Calla Whitford prepared her instruments with practiced precision. Her movements were automatic after years of performing this procedure, but her heart still felt heavy every single time. The small brown puppy on the metal table watched her with trusting eyes, his tail giving a hopeful wag despite being labeled as unadoptable by the county shelter system. "I'm sorry, little one," Calla whispered, reaching out to scratch behind his ears. The puppy leaned into her touch, making the weight in her chest grow even heavier. She'd been doing relief work at various shelters for months now, but these moments never got easier. The clock on the wall ticked steadily as she drew up the proper dosage of euthanasia solution. Her hand moved steadily, despite the emotional turmoil churning inside her. This was part of the job, the hardest part, but necessary, or so she'd been told countless times. As she turned back to the table, something caught her eye, a glint of metal beneath the puppy's thick fur. Frowning, Calla parted the fur around his neck, carefully. There, partially hidden, was a brass tag. It wasn't a regular ID tag. This was different, more official looking, with numbers stamped into the metal. "What's this?" she murmured, examining it more closely. The puppy sat patiently, tongue lolling out as she investigated. This was a custody tag, the kind used when animals were being held as evidence. Her heart started beating faster. Why would an evidence animal be scheduled for euthanasia? She set down the syringe and quickly pulled up the puppy's file on the computer. Nothing in his paperwork mentioned any legal holds or court cases. According to his intake forms, he was simply a stray brought in last week, deemed unadoptable due to aggressive tendencies. But the happy little tail, Wagger, on her exam table showed no signs of aggression. The door opened behind her, and Calla turned to see Cassandra Greer striding in, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. The shelter director's grey eyes took in the scene, the unused syringe, the puppy still very much alive, and Calla's hand still holding the brass tag. "Is there a problem, Dr. Whitford?" Greer's voice was smooth as glass, but there was an edge to it that made Calla's spine stiffen. "This puppy has a custody tag," Calla said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "He's supposed to be held as evidence. We can't euthanize him." Greer's perfectly manicured hand waved dismissively. "That's an old tag. The case was resolved weeks ago. Please proceed with the procedure." But something felt wrong. The tag was clean, not weathered like it would be if it had been on the puppy for weeks. And why wasn't it mentioned in his paperwork? Calla stood straighter, squaring her shoulders. "I'm sorry, but I need to see documentation showing the case is closed before I can proceed. It's protocol." The words came out firmer than she expected. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as Greer's expression hardened. "Dr. Whitford, I don't appreciate having my authority questioned. That dog is scheduled for euthanasia, and you will carry out the procedure. Now." The puppy pressed against Calla's side, sensing the tension. She placed a protective hand on his back. "No," she said simply. "Not without proper documentation." Greer took a step forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Let me be very clear. You are a relief veterinarian. Temporary. Replaceable. If you want to continue working in this county, you will do as you're told." Calla's heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't back down. The puppy's warm presence against her leg reminded her why she became a veterinarian in the first place. To protect animals, to be their voice when they had none. "I understand that's your position," Kala replied, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "But I took an oath. I won't euthanize an animal that might be evidence in an ongoing case. That would be tampering with evidence, and I won't risk my license." Greer's eyes flashed. "You're making a serious mistake," she said, each word sharp as a blade. "This is your last chance to do the right thing." "I am doing the right thing," Kala said quietly, but with conviction. She reached down and picked up the puppy, cradling him against her chest. He immediately tried to lick her face, his tail still wagging. "Put that dog down." Greer's words came out like ice. "No." Kala took a step back, putting more distance between them. "I'm reporting this to the proper authorities. Something isn't right here, and I won't be part of it." Greer's carefully controlled expression cracked for just a moment, revealing something dark and ugly underneath. "You have no idea what you're getting into," she hissed. "This is bigger than you, bigger than some worthless mutt. You're going to regret this." But Kala stood her ground, even as fear crawled up her spine. The puppy in her arms represented everything she'd sworn to protect when she became a veterinarian. She backed down now. If she let fear rule her decisions, she'd never be able to look herself in the mirror again. "Maybe I will regret it," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "But I'd regret giving in even more. I'm keeping this dog safe until we sort this out properly." Greer's hands clenched into fists at her sides. For a moment, Kala thought she might actually strike her. But instead, the shelter director turned sharply on her heel. "You're fired," she spat over her shoulder as she stalked toward the door. "Clear out your things and be gone in 10 minutes. And don't think this is over." The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing in the small exam room. Kala's legs felt weak, and she sagged against the exam table, still holding the puppy close. He whined softly and licked her chin, as if trying to comfort her. "It's okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "We'll figure this out." Her hands were shaking as she gathered her few personal items from the clinic area. The other staff members avoided her eyes as she packed, the tension thick in the air. She could feel Greer watching from her office, those cold grey eyes following her every move. The puppy stayed close to her heels as she walked out to her car, his brass tag jingling softly. The sound reminded her that she'd made the right choice, even if it had cost her this job. Something was very wrong at this shelter, and that tag was the key to figuring out what it was. As she settled the puppy into her passenger seat, Kala took a deep breath. She'd lost her position, potentially damaged her career prospects in the county, and made an enemy of someone powerful. But looking at the trusting face of the dog she'd saved, she knew she couldn't have done anything else. The brass tag caught the sunlight as the puppy shifted, the numbers stamped into it holding secrets that someone had tried to bury. Kala started her car, her mind already working on what to do next. She had chosen her path. Now she had to see it through, whatever the consequences might be. The county shelter grew smaller in her rearview mirror as she drove away, but the weight of what had just happened settled heavily on her shoulders. She'd taken a stand for what was right, but she had a feeling this was just the beginning of a much bigger battle. The puppy dozed off in the passenger seat, peaceful and unaware of the storm they'd just stepped into. Kala glanced at him, drawing strength from his presence. Whatever came next, she knew she'd made the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for, even if the fight seemed impossible to win. Back in her small home office, Kala sat at her desk with the puppy curled up at her feet. Her fingers flew across her laptop keyboard as she searched for information about the brass tag's case number. The metal disc had clearly been meant to track evidence, but evidence of what? The young shepherd mix watched her with those intelligent amber eyes, his head tilted in curiosity. Every so often, his tail would thump against the floor, as if encouraging her to keep going. She'd given him fresh water and some kibble from her own dog's supplies, which he'd devoured eagerly. After an hour of digging through public records and news archives, Kala finally found something. Her breath caught as she read the article from 8 months ago. Local deputy suspended following controversial investigation. The story mentioned Deputy Mara Locke, whose name matched the custodian information stamped on the brass tag. According to the article, She had been suspended for procedural violations while investigating what she claimed was an illegal dog breeding operation. But before any formal hearing could take place, Deputy Locke had vanished. "What were you mixed up in?" Calla murmured, reaching down to scratch behind the puppy's ears. He leaned into her touch, clearly starved for affection despite whatever trauma he'd been through. She needed more information, but she couldn't trust the shelter's records now, not after Greer's reaction. There was one person who might be able to help, though. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she'd used many times before. "Harlan? It's Dr. Whitford. I need a favor." Harlan Voss had been the county's animal control officer for over 15 years. He wasn't always the easiest person to work with, but he was thorough and kept detailed records. More importantly, he had access to the universal chip scanner that could read any brand of microchip. "This better be important, Doc," he grumbled when he met her 30 minutes later in the parking lot of a local coffee shop. "I'm supposed to be on patrol." "It is," Calla assured him, leading the puppy out of her car on a spare leash. "I need you to scan this dog. There's something weird going on at the shelter." Harlan's weathered face creased with concern as she explained about the brass tag and Greer's reaction. He ran a hand through his graying hair. "I always thought something wasn't right there, but—" He shook his head. "Let's see what we've got." He retrieved the scanner from his truck and ran it over the puppy's shoulders. The device beeped, and Harlan's eyes widened as he read the display. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "This chip's registered to evidence from a raid that happened about 9 months ago. Big operation out near the county line, dozens of dogs seized. But the paperwork all disappeared, and the case went cold." Calla felt her heart racing. The same case Deputy Locke was working on. Has to be. Harlan looked troubled now. "She came to me back then, asked about some irregularities in where the seized dogs were being sent. I didn't want to get involved, told her to go through proper channels." He looked away, shame crossing his features. "Maybe if I'd helped her." The puppy pressed against Calla's leg, sensing her tension. She reached down to steady herself, as much as to comfort him. "What happened to all those dogs?" she asked. "Officially, they were distributed to various shelters for rehabilitation and adoption. But now," he gestured at the puppy, "this little guy proves that story was bogus. He should have been logged as evidence, not marked for euthanasia." The puppy's tail wagged as they both looked at him, his one white paw bright against the asphalt. Something about his alert, upward-gazing expression reminded Calla of a kite dancing in the wind, tethered but yearning skyward. "Kite?" she said suddenly. "That's what I'm going to call him. Because he survived, and he's going to help us uncover the truth." Harlan nodded slowly. "It's a good name, but Calla." He glanced around the empty parking lot. "You need to be careful. Deputy Locke disappeared for a reason. Whatever she found, it was big enough to make someone want to shut her up." "I can't just ignore this," Calla said firmly. "These dogs are evidence of a crime. Kite was nearly killed to cover it up. Who knows how many others weren't as lucky." The older man studied her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "All right, I'll help you quietly. I've got access to old case files that never made it into the computer system. Maybe there's something there that can tell us what happened to Deputy Locke." "Thank you, Harlan." Calla felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. She wasn't in this alone anymore. "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "This could get ugly. Are you sure you want to pursue this?" Kite looked up at her with complete trust, his tail still wagging. In just a few hours, he'd gone from terrified and condemned to hopeful and alive. How many other dogs needed someone to fight for them? "I'm sure," she said firmly. "Whatever happens, we need to expose the truth." Harlan nodded grimly. "I'll start going through my old files tonight. Be careful who you talk to about this. And keep that dog close. He's living proof that something's very wrong here." As they parted ways, Calla felt the weight of what they'd discovered settling over her. A missing deputy, vanished evidence, and a conspiracy that reached into the very institutions meant to protect both animals and people. Kite pressed against her leg again, grounding her in the present moment. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "Let's get you home. We've got work to do." The drive home was quiet, But Calla's mind was racing. The brass tag that had caught her eye that morning had led them to something far bigger and darker than she'd imagined. But looking at Kite's peaceful face as he dozed in her passenger seat, she knew she couldn't walk away. Whatever Deputy Locke had discovered, it had cost her dearly. Now it was up to Calla and Harlan to pick up where she'd left off. The truth was out there, hidden in old files and corrupted records, and most importantly, in the living proof sleeping beside her. Kite's brass tag caught the afternoon sun, the numbers that had saved his life glinting like a beacon. Sometimes the smallest things, Calla reflected, could unlock the biggest secrets. She just hoped they were ready for whatever those secrets might reveal. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the shelter's parking lot as Calla made her way back inside. Her earlier confrontation with Greer still had her nerves on edge, but she needed to finish her rounds. The concrete hallway echoed with barking as she approached the main office. Cassandra Greer stood waiting, her grey eyes cold as winter frost. She wasn't alone. A heavy-set man in an expensive suit lounged in her office chair like it was a throne. "Dr. Whitford," Greer's voice cut through the air. "Commissioner Riddick would like a word." Calla's stomach tightened. Everyone knew August Riddick. His campaign posters plastered half the county. He rose slowly, a practiced politician's smile spreading across his face. "Dr. Whitford, such a pleasure." His handshake was too firm, too long. "I understand there was some confusion this morning about proper shelter protocols." "There was no confusion," Calla said steadily. "That dog had an evidence tag. He shouldn't have been scheduled for euthanasia." "Ah yes, the infamous tag." Riddick's smile didn't waver. "A simple clerical error, I'm sure. These things happen in busy municipal shelters. The important thing is maintaining smooth operations." "With all due respect, Commissioner, this wasn't a clerical error. That dog was evidence in an open investigation. An investigation that's long closed," Greer cut in sharply. "Really, Doctor Whitford, this obsession with ancient history is becoming concerning." Riddick settled his bulk against Greer's desk. "You know, I've always admired the dedication of our relief veterinarians. Such important work you do. It would be a shame if questions about your judgment affected your ability to practice in this county." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Calla felt her hands trembling slightly and clasped them behind her back. "Are you threatening my license, Commissioner?" "Threatening?" He laughed, but his eyes were hard. "My dear, I'm looking out for your best interests. A young professional like yourself, you have such a promising future ahead. Why jeopardize that over one stray dog?" "Because it's wrong," Calla said simply, "and we both know this goes beyond one dog." Something dangerous flickered across Riddick's face before his politician's mask slipped back into place. "Miss Greer, would you give us a moment?" Greer nodded and stepped out, closing the door behind her. The office suddenly felt very small. "Let me be clear." Riddick's voice dropped to a growl. "You're poking your nose where it doesn't belong. That tag should have been destroyed months ago. The fact that it wasn't is unfortunate, but easily remedied. Walk away now, and we'll forget this happened." "And if I don't?" He straightened, tugging his suit jacket into place. "Things happen to people who don't know when to let sleeping dogs lie. Tragic things." Asked Deputy Locke. "Oh wait, you can't. No one's seen her in months." Calla's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "Is that another threat, Commissioner?" "That's friendly advice from a concerned public servant." His smile returned, sharp as a knife. "Think it over, Doctor." Carefully. He brushed past her and out the door. Through the window, she watched him and Greer walk to his luxury car, heads bent in conversation. Her hands were shaking in earnest now. The drive home that evening felt longer than usual. Every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. Every car that lingered too long in her rearview mirror set her heart racing. The sun had set by the time she pulled into her driveway, casting deep shadows between the houses. Kite greeted her at the door with eager whimpers. She'd left him safely crated inside, not trusting the shelter kennels after this morning's events. His warm presence helped steady her nerves as she moved through her evening routine. Later, lying awake in bed, Calla replayed Riddick's threats. The commissioner wielded enormous influence in the county. He could indeed make it impossible for her to practice here. Or worse, If his veiled reference to Deputy Locke was any indication, sleep proved elusive. Around midnight, she gave up and decided to take Kite for a quick walk, hoping the night air would clear her head. As she reached for her car keys, planning to drive to the better-lit park a few blocks away, something made her pause. Following an instinct she couldn't explain, Calla knelt beside her car and peered underneath. In the dim glow of her phone's flashlight, she spotted it, a dark puddle slowly spreading beneath the vehicle. Heart pounding, she traced the leak to its source. The brake line had been cut. The clean slice could only have been deliberate. If she hadn't noticed, if she'd driven to the park. Calla scrambled backward, suddenly grateful for every paranoid impulse that had kept her home tonight. Her hands shook as she called the police, but she kept her voice steady as she reported the vandalism. They promised to send someone, but she held little hope for real action. This was Riddick's County, after all. Inside, Kite pressed against her legs, whining softly at her obvious distress. Calla sank to the floor beside him, burying her face in his soft fur. "What have we gotten ourselves into, boy?" The puppy had no answers, but his solid warmth helped anchor her as implications crashed over her like waves. This wasn't just career threats anymore. Someone, Riddick, Greer, or their associates, had tried to cause an accident that could have killed her. The missing evidence, Deputy Locke's disappearance, the desperate attempt to euthanize Kite, it all pointed to something bigger and darker than she'd imagined. And now they'd shown how far they'd go to keep it hidden. Calla hugged Kite closer, his heartbeat steady against her chest. She'd known taking on Greer would be risky, but this escalation terrified her. Every shadow in her home suddenly seemed threatening. Every unexpected sound made her jump. When the police finally arrived, they took perfunctory notes and suggested she must have run over something that damaged the brake line. Their casual dismissal of clear tampering confirmed her fears. She couldn't count on official channels for protection. She spent the rest of the night in her living room, lights blazing, jumping at every sound. Kite dozed beside her but would snap to alertness whenever she tensed. As dawn began to lighten the sky, Calla faced a harsh reality. Her life was in danger, and she was largely on her own. The sweet, trusting puppy beside her was evidence of corruption that reached to the highest levels of county government. Powerful people wanted that evidence erased, and they'd already shown they were willing to kill to keep their secrets. Morning light crept through her windows, but brought little comfort. She had decisions to make. She could back down, as Riddick had advised, or she could fight back. But fighting meant risking not just her career now, but her life. Kite stirred and pressed his nose into her hand, his eyes full of absolute trust. Calla scratched behind his ears, remembering how close he'd come to death just yesterday. How many other dogs had died to cover up whatever conspiracy she'd stumbled into. How many people had been silenced. The morning after the brake line incident, Calla arrived at the shelter early, her hands still shaking slightly as she unlocked the side entrance. Harlan's truck was already in the parking lot, and she found him waiting by her office, his weathered face creased with concern. "Heard about what happened last night," he said quietly. "You okay?" Calla nodded, though okay felt far from accurate. "Did you bring those records we talked about?" Harlan patted the thick folder tucked under his arm. "Everything I could get my hands on. Intake forms, euthanasia logs, adoption records, going back 18 months. They settled into her small office, spreading papers across every available surface. The familiar smell of coffee and antiseptic helped steady Calla's nerves as they began sorting through the documentation. "Look for anything involving seized animals," Calla instructed, "especially ones marked unadoptable like Kite." Hour after hour, they combed through the records. Around mid-morning, patterns began emerging that made Calla's blood run cold. "Here," she said, pointing to a series of entries. "These 3 dogs came in from the same address last March, all marked unadoptable. Within 24 hours of arrival, all euthanized immediately." Harlan leaned in, frowning. "I remember that case. Drug bust at a house on Maple Street. But those dogs weren't aggressive, scared. Yeah, but nothing that made them unadoptable. And here," Calla flipped to another page, 5 more from a raid in May. Same pattern. Marked unadoptable, and put down before anyone could evaluate them properly. She spread out more papers, connecting dots that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. Dozens of animals, all connected to police raids or investigations, all eliminated with suspicious haste. The documentation's too perfect, Harlan noted, examining a stack of intake forms. Look at these behavioral assessments. They're practically identical, just with different dates. Nobody's that consistent in their observations. These were copied. Kala nodded grimly. They're covering their tracks, using euthanasia to destroy evidence that could link back to whatever criminal activities they're trying to hide. The realization hit her like a physical blow. How many innocent animals had died to protect corrupt officials? How long had this been going on? Harlan ran a hand through his graying hair. Makes sense why they wanted Kite gone so bad. That brass tag ties him directly to Deputy Locke's last case. And now Locke's missing, Kala added softly. Just like all these animals that could have connected dots someone doesn't want connected. They worked through lunch, piecing together more connections. The pattern was clear once they knew what to look for. Selective editing of records, convenient behavioral issues documented just in time to justify immediate euthanasia, missing photographs and intake videos that should have been standard procedure. The whole system's rigged, Harlan muttered, disgust evident in his voice. We're supposed to be protecting these animals, giving them a chance. Instead, we're being used to clean up evidence. Kala stared at the wall of documentation they'd assembled. This isn't sloppy record-keeping or rushed decisions. This is methodical, calculated. They've turned this shelter into a disposal site for anything that might expose their corruption. Her hands clenched into fists as she thought of all the lives lost, animals who might have been saved if someone had questioned the pattern sooner. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. We need copies of everything, she decided. Multiple copies, stored in different places. If they realize we're onto them, they'll try to destroy the evidence, Harlan finished. Already on it. He patted his jacket pocket, where his phone had been steadily photographing documents all morning. They worked quickly but carefully, making sure every crucial record was duplicated. Kala's office printer hummed steadily as they created hard copies to complement their digital documentation. What happens when they figure out we're investigating? Harlan asked, his voice low. After what they did to your car. Kala met his concerned gaze. I can't back down now. Too many lives have been lost already. Whatever they're hiding, it must be big for them to go to these lengths. She thought of Kite, safely housed with a trusted friend after last night's incident. One puppy who had survived the system, thanks to a brass tag and sheer luck. How many others hadn't been so fortunate? We need to be smart about this, Harlan cautioned. These people clearly aren't above violence. We should take this to someone outside the county, state authorities maybe, or a noise in the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps approached, then passed by. Kala realized she'd been holding her breath and forced herself to exhale slowly. You're right, she agreed, but we need more concrete evidence first. Something that proves this goes beyond just questionable shelter practices. They spent the next several hours organizing their findings, creating a timeline of suspicious incidents and identifying key patterns in the doctored records. The more they dug, the clearer it became that this was no small-time operation. Look at these dates, Kala pointed out. Major drug busts, corruption investigations, organized crime cases. Every time the police seize animals from these situations, they end up here. And within days, they're gone. No traces left except these suspicious papers. Harlan nodded grimly. Perfect way to dispose of evidence. Who's going to question a shelter euthanizing unadoptable animals? It's all neat and legal on paper. Except it isn't, Kala said firmly. These assessments are fabricated. The timing is too convenient. And now, we have proof. She gathered the most damning evidence into a separate folder, the copied behavioral assessments, the suspicious timing patterns, the missing documentation that should have existed. Her hands trembled slightly, but her resolve had never been stronger. They tried to kill me last night, she said quietly, because I wouldn't play along with their system. Because I asked questions about one puppy with a brass tag. Harlan's expression hardened. Makes you wonder what exactly was in Deputy Locke's last case. What she found that made them want to eliminate every trace, including her. Calla looked at the wall of evidence they'd assembled. Somewhere in these papers was the truth. About Locke's disappearance. About the corruption in their county. About why someone had tried to engineer her accident last night. We keep digging, she decided. Carefully, quietly. But we don't stop until we uncover what they're trying so hard to hide. Her office felt smaller somehow, the weight of their discoveries pressing in around them. But Calla felt stronger too, more certain of her path forward. Someone had to stand up against this corruption, had to give voice to all those who had been silenced. They spent the rest of the afternoon making sure their evidence was secure, developing plans to continue their investigation without drawing attention. Every noise made them jump, every shadow held potential threats, but they pressed on. The truth was in these records, hidden between falsified assessments and convenient coincidences. Calla was determined to find it, no matter the personal cost. Too many lives, human and animal, depended on someone finally exposing what was really happening in their county. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the shelter windows as Calla and Harlan worked methodically to document everything. The quiet hum of the copy machine filled her small office as they duplicated page after page of suspicious records. "We need 3 copies of everything," Calla instructed, carefully organizing papers into separate folders. One for safekeeping, one for analysis, and one as backup in case anything happens to the others. Harlan nodded, his weathered face tight with concentration. "Smart thinking. I've got a locked filing cabinet at home where we can store one set." They worked in focused silence, the stack of evidence growing steadily larger. Behavioral assessments with identical wording, despite different dates, intake forms with missing signatures, euthanasia records that coincided suspiciously with police investigations. "What about Kite?" Harlan asked suddenly, pausing in his work. "He's not safe here anymore, if they realize what we're doing." Calla's heart clenched at the thought of the shepherd mix with his trusting amber eyes. "I've got a friend who runs a small rescue outside the county. Sarah can keep him safe until we figure this out." The decision to move Kite came not a moment too soon. That evening, after transferring him to Sarah's care, Calla returned home feeling slightly more at ease. At least the living proof of their investigation was safely hidden away. But her relief was short-lived. The next morning, Cassandra Greer swept into the shelter like a storm cloud, flanked by 2 uniformed officers and clutching a stack of official-looking papers. "Where is the shepherd mix?" she demanded, striding into Calla's office without knocking. "The one you've been illegally harboring?" Calla's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about. All adoptions and transfers have been properly documented." Greer's grey eyes flashed as she slapped a document onto Calla's desk. "Really?" "Then explain this court order, demanding the immediate surrender of evidence in an ongoing investigation." Calla scanned the paper, her heart racing. The document looked authentic, complete with official seals and signatures. But something felt wrong about the timing. "I'll need to verify this with the court," she said carefully, reaching for her phone. "That won't be necessary." Greer's smile was razor-sharp. "Officer Voss has already confirmed the dog's location. Haven't you, Harlan?" Calla turned to see Harlan standing in the doorway, his face ashen. Their eyes met, and the betrayal she saw there knocked the breath from her lungs. "I'm sorry, Calla," he said quietly. "They threatened my pension, my family. I had to tell them." The world seemed to tilt sideways as the implications hit her. Harlan had been her ally, her partner, in uncovering this corruption. And now, "Sarah's rescue," she whispered. "You told them about Sarah's." Harlan couldn't meet her eyes. "They already knew. They were watching us. I just confirmed it." Greer's triumphant smile widened. "The officers are already en route to collect the animal. Don't worry, Dr. Whitford. He'll be properly processed according to protocol." The words sent ice through Calla's veins. Processed meant euthanized, erased, just like all the other evidence they'd discovered. "You can't do this," she protested, standing up. "That dog is evidence of your corruption. He's proof that you're using this shelter to cover up crimes." Careful, Doctor. Greer's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. You're making serious accusations without any evidence, and after your recent car troubles, you might want to consider being more cooperative. The threat hung in the air between them. Kala's hands clenched into fists at her sides, fury and helplessness warring inside her. Officer Voss, Greer turned to Harlan, please escort Dr. Whitford to her office and ensure she stays there until our business is concluded. We wouldn't want any unfortunate interference. Harlan stepped forward, his movements wooden. Come on, Kala. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. How could you? Kala's voice broke as she stared at him. After everything we uncovered, everything we knew they were doing, how could you just give up? I didn't have a choice, he muttered, gently but firmly guiding her toward her office. They knew everything about the investigation, about the copied records, about Kite. They were going to destroy us all. Once inside her office, Kala sank into her chair, feeling hollow. Through the window, she watched Greer stride toward her car, victory written in every line of her perfectly postured frame. I'll lose everything if I don't cooperate, Harlan said softly from the doorway. My job, my pension, my reputation. They've got it all wrapped up, neat and legal looking. There's nothing we can do. Kala didn't respond. She couldn't even look at him. The weight of their failure pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Hours passed like years. When Harlan finally told her she could leave, the sun was setting. She walked to her car in a daze, her mind replaying every moment, every decision that had led to this devastating defeat. At home, she sat in her darkened living room, surrounded by the copies of evidence they'd gathered. All those records, all those suspicious patterns they'd uncovered, and none of it would matter now. They'd lost their key piece of living proof. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. I'm so sorry. They had all the right papers. There was nothing I could do. Kala's vision blurred with tears as she thought of Kite, his gentle trust, his expressive eyes, the way he'd begun to overcome his fears. Now he would become just another statistic, another convenient disposal of evidence that someone wanted hidden. The betrayal cut deep, but it wasn't just Harlan's actions that haunted her. It was the realization that the corruption ran so much deeper than they'd imagined. They had power enough to force compliance, to create legitimate-looking documents, to threaten and coerce until good people looked the other way. She thought of Deputy Locke, who had disappeared after getting too close to whatever truth lay hidden in these tangled threads of corruption. Had she faced similar choices, similar pressures? The night stretched long before her as she sat amid the scattered evidence of their investigation, feeling more alone than ever. Somewhere in the darkness, a dog barked, a simple, ordinary sound that now carried the weight of all she had lost. The clock ticked past midnight as Kala sat in her dimly lit living room, surrounded by scattered papers and folders. Her laptop screen cast a pale blue glow across her face, highlighting the tracks of dried tears on her cheeks. Every few minutes, she refreshed her email, hoping for any news about Kite, but knowing deep down it was futile. The sudden rap at her door made her jump. Her heart pounded as she remembered the cut brake lines, Greer's threats, and all the other warnings. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Dr. Whitford. The voice was female, low and urgent. It's about the brass tag. Kala's breath caught in her throat. Nobody else knew about that tag. Nobody except the missing Deputy Locke. With trembling fingers, she grabbed the baseball bat she'd started keeping near the couch and approached the door. Through the peephole, she saw a tall woman with short-cropped dark hair, wearing a plain black jacket and jeans. Her stance was alert, professional, definitely law enforcement training. How do I know I can trust you? Kala called through the door. Because I'm the one who put that tag on the Shepherd mix. Serial number 4729B. It wasn't a custody marker, it was a signal. Kala's hands shook as she undid the chain and opened the door. The woman who stepped inside moved with contained energy, her eyes immediately scanning the room for threats. Despite the late hour, she looked wide awake and focused. Deputy Mara Locke, she said quietly, showing Kala a badge. Though, officially, I'm still listed as missing or possibly dead. You're alive, Kala breathed. Everyone thought. That's what they were supposed to think. Locke's mouth tightened. I've been deep undercover for 8 months, tracking a breeding and fighting ring operating out of Black Fen Quarry. That puppy, the one you called Kite, he's critical evidence. Calla sank onto the couch, her legs weak. But Greer took him. They're going to. Not yet, Locke cut in. They can't move too quickly without raising suspicions. They'll want to make it look procedural, by the book. We have a small window of time. Hope flickered in Calla's chest for the first time since Harlan's betrayal. Tell me everything. Locke paced the room as she spoke, her movements controlled but restless. The ring's been operating for years, using the shelter as a front. They take promising puppies from raids, train them as fighting dogs or breeders. The ones that don't make the cut disappear, listed as unadoptable, euthanized, records doctored. But Kite was different, Calla said slowly. He had that tag. He was being trained as a service dog when they stole him, Locke explained. Part of a legitimate program working with veterans. I managed to tag him during the raid, but things went sideways. They made me, and I had to go dark fast. She paused, running a hand through her short hair. I've got a niece who needs a service dog. When I saw what they were doing, stealing dogs already in training, destroying them, her voice hardened. I couldn't let it stand. Calla thought of Kite's gentle nature, his intelligence, the way he responded to commands despite his fear. It all made sense now. But why didn't you come forward sooner? Couldn't. Risk it. The corruption goes deep, reaches all the way up to Commissioner Riddick. I needed proof, documentation, and I needed someone on the inside who'd notice that tag and have the guts to act on it. Locke's eyes met Calla's. You did better than I hoped. Those records you and Officer Voss collected, they're exactly what we need. Harlan, Calla said bitterly. He betrayed us, told them everything. He did what he had to do to protect his family, Locke said firmly. And he played it exactly right. They think they've won, think they've contained the threat. That makes them vulnerable. She pulled out her phone, showing Calla a series of messages. Voss has been feeding me information since the beginning. Every move they make, every document they forge, he's documenting all of it, including their plans for Kite. Calla's eyes widened as she realized what this meant. Harlan, he's still working with you? Double agent, Locke confirmed with a slight smile. Had to make it convincing. The best way to protect you both was to make them think he'd turned. Relief and understanding washed over Calla. She thought of Harlan's wooden movements, his inability to meet her eyes. It hadn't been shame, but rather the strain of maintaining his cover. So what happens now? She asked. Now, Locke said, pulling out a small notebook. We move fast. They're planning to transfer Kite to Black Fen tomorrow night, once he's there. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Calla leaned forward, her exhaustion forgotten. What do you need me to do? It's dangerous, Locke warned. These people have already tried to kill you once. If they catch us, I don't care, Calla said firmly. I won't let them hurt him, and I won't let them keep using the shelter to cover up their crimes. Locke studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, first, we need to get those records somewhere safe. Then I'll show you exactly where Black Fen Quarry is and what we're up against. As they bent over maps and documents, planning their next moves, Calla felt a fierce determination replace her earlier despair. Kite wasn't just a puppy she'd tried to save anymore. He was living proof of corruption that reached through every level of local government. His life, and the lives of countless other dogs, depended on what they did next. The night deepened around them as they worked, Deputy Locke's quiet voice laying out the complex web of corruption she'd uncovered. With every revelation, every piece of the puzzle that fell into place, Calla's resolve strengthened. They would save Kite, expose the truth, and bring down everyone involved, no matter what it took. Calla's hands trembled slightly as she set up her phone to record. The small device sat between them on her kitchen table, its screen glowing softly in the dim light. Deputy Mara Locke sat across from her, back straight, eyes focused. The clock on the wall read 11:15 at night, but exhaustion had given way to a sharp, nervous energy. Are you ready? Calla asked. her finger hovering over the record button. Locke gave a curt nod. "Let's do this properly." She pulled out her badge, placing it on the table. "I am Deputy Mara Locke, badge number 7843, formerly assigned to the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department." Calla pressed record. The red light blinked steadily as Locke began her testimony. "On March 15th of this year, I participated in a raid on what was reported as an illegal dogfighting operation at Black Fen Quarry. What we found was much bigger. A sophisticated breeding and training facility with connections to multiple criminal enterprises across 3 states. Her voice remained steady as she detailed names, dates, and locations. She described elaborate record-keeping systems, medical equipment stolen from veterinary clinics, and training schedules for dozens of dogs. The operation wasn't just about dog fighting. They were stealing service dogs in training, valuable breeding stock, even pets with specific traits. The shelter system was being used to launder these animals, either redistributing them through the underground network or disposing of those that didn't meet their criteria. Calla's stomach turned as Locke described how she'd discovered the connection between Commissioner Riddick and the operation's leadership. The commissioner was providing protection and using his influence to block investigations. When I got too close, they tried to discredit me. Made it look like I was taking bribes, tampering with evidence. "That's when you disappeared," Calla said softly. Locke nodded. "I knew they'd try to silence me permanently if I stayed. So I went underground, kept gathering evidence. The brass tag I left on Kite was my way of marking him as evidence, and hoping someone would notice. They spent the next hour recording everything, the network of corrupt officials, the doctored shelter records, the money trail Locke had pieced together. When they finally stopped recording, Calla's phone showed multiple files safely saved and backed up to her cloud storage. "This is good," Locke said, reviewing the recordings. "But we need more. We need that injunction to protect Kite and stop them from destroying more evidence." Calla checked her watch. 11:45. "Judge Martinez handles after-hours emergency petitions. She's tough but fair, and more importantly, she has no connections to Riddick." "I know someone in her office," Locke added. "They'll vouch for me, confirm I'm not really dirty. Make the call." While Calla contacted the judge's office, Locke made copies of her documentation. Papers spread across the kitchen table, photographs, financial records, shelter documents spanning months of investigation. Judge Martinez agreed to meet them at midnight. They gathered everything quickly, but as they headed for the door, Calla paused. "We need Harlan," she said firmly. "Whatever his reasons, he knows. More than he's telling us." Locke checked her phone. He's still at the shelter, working late, supposedly doing inventory. "Then that's where we're going first." They found Harlan in the shelter's records room, surrounded by files and looking haggard. He jumped when they entered, then sagged with relief when he saw who it was. "I've been waiting for you," he said quietly, "hoping you'd come." "Time to choose sides, Harlan," Calla said, her voice gentle but firm. "For real this time." He ran a hand over his face, then reached under the desk and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "I chose my side months ago. Been documenting everything, every illegal transfer, every forged euthanasia record." He dumped the contents onto the desk, dozens of photographs, notes, USB drives. "Started the day they threatened my daughter's college scholarship if I didn't play along." "Why didn't you tell me?" Calla asked. "Couldn't risk it. Had to make them believe I was still their puppet. But watching you stand up to them." He shook his head. "You gave me the courage to finally use all this." Locke quickly sorted through the evidence. "This is exactly what we need. Proof of systematic abuse of the system. Times, dates, signatures." "There's more," Harlan said. "I got photos of their meeting tonight. The whole operation laid out on Riddick's whiteboard. They're not just moving Kite tomorrow. They're clearing out the entire facility at Black Fen, moving everything across state lines." Calla's heart raced. "Then we have to move now. We have a meeting with Judge Martinez in." She checked her watch. 20 minutes. "I'm coming with you," Harlan said, standing up. "Time I testified too." They gathered everything quickly, Harlan adding his evidence to their growing collection. As they hurried to their cars, Calla touched his arm. "Thank you," she said simply, "for being braver than I gave you credit for." He gave her a tired smile. "Seems to be going around lately." Judge Martinez's home office was warm and well lit, belying the late hour. The judge, a small woman with steel grey hair and sharp eyes, listened without interruption as they presented their evidence. Her face grew increasingly grave as Locke's recording played, and she examined Harlan's photographs with careful attention. "This is extremely serious," she said finally, "and you have more than enough evidence to justify emergency action." She pulled out official forms, her pen scratching quickly across the paper. "I'm granting an immediate injunction preventing any movement of animals from either the shelter or Black Fen Quarry. Additionally, I'm ordering all records frozen and facilities sealed for investigation." She handed the signed papers to Calla. "I'm also issuing warrants for Commissioner Riddick and Director Greer. I'll have police units ready to move by dawn." She fixed them each with a stern look. "Until then, this stays absolutely quiet. We can't risk tipping them off." As they left the judge's house, Calla felt light, headed with relief and exhaustion. The official papers in her hand represented everything they'd been fighting for. "What now?" she asked. "Now," Locke said, checking her phone. "We get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She looked at Harlan. "Can you keep things quiet at the shelter for a few more hours?" He nodded. "They trust me now, thanks to my betrayal of Calla. I'll make sure nothing moves until the warrants are served." They parted ways carefully, taking different routes home to avoid attention. As Calla finally crawled into bed at 2:30 in the morning, she thought of Kite, waiting in his kennel at the shelter. "Hold on," she whispered. "Just a little longer." Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from Locke. "Team meeting, 6 a.m. We're not done yet." Calla set her alarm, knowing sleep would be brief but necessary. Tomorrow would change everything. For Kite, for the shelter, for all of them. They had the plus, evidence, they had the law on their side. And most importantly, they had each other. For the first time since this all began, she felt truly hopeful. The next few hours would be crucial, but they were ready. The truth was finally coming to light, and nothing could stop it now. The pre-dawn air hung heavy with mist as 3 vehicles approached Black Fen Quarry from different directions. Calla's hands gripped her steering wheel tightly, her headlights cutting through the fog. In her rearview mirror, she could see the faint outlines of police cruisers positioning themselves at strategic points along the access road. Deputy Locke's voice crackled over the secure radio channel. "Everyone in position. Remember, we're looking for documentation first. Those files are our priority." Calla parked behind a screen of trees, where Harlan was already waiting. His animal control truck carried equipment they hoped they wouldn't need: catch poles, restraints, and transport cages. They'd brought everything necessary to handle whatever they might find inside. "You okay?" Harlan asked softly as she approached. Calla nodded, though her heart was racing. "Let's finish this." The quarry's main gate stood open, unusual for this hour. Deputy Locke joined them, her tactical vest reflecting the dim light. Behind her, 6 officers moved into formation, weapons at ready. "Something's wrong," Locke muttered. "Security should be here." They advanced carefully through the entrance. The gravel crunched beneath their feet as they approached the large metal barn that dominated the site. Paint peeled from its walls, and heavy chains secured the main doors. "Bolt cutters," Locke commanded. An officer stepped forward, and the chains fell away with a heavy clang. The doors creaked open to reveal darkness beyond. Flashlight beams cut through the gloom, revealing row upon row of empty cages. The air carried a sharp chemical smell that made Calla's eyes water. "They've cleaned recently," Harlan observed, running a finger along one cage. "Too recently." "Spread out," Locke ordered. "Check everything." They had to leave something behind. Calla moved deeper into the barn, her flashlight beam revealing more evidence of recent activity. Feed bags were stacked against one wall, their labels removed. Medical supplies filled a metal cabinet, syringes, antibiotics, and other items that shouldn't be here. "Over here," one officer called out. "Found something." They converged on a small office tucked into the corner. File cabinets lined the walls, their drawers hanging open and empty. But beneath a desk, partially hidden, sat a laptop and a stack of papers. They missed some, Locke said, reaching for them. That's when Calla smelled it. Something new cutting through the chemical scent. Something burning. "Fire!" Harlan's shout echoed through the barn. "Everyone out!" Flames erupted along the back wall with impossible speed, racing up the old wooden beams. The fire spread with unnatural intensity, suggesting an accelerant had been used. "Grab what you can!" Locke shouted, stuffing papers into her vest. Calla snatched the laptop as smoke began filling the space. The flames moved like living things, cutting off their original exit. Heat pressed against them as they retreated toward a side door. "This way," an officer called, leading them through the maze of cages. The metal was growing hot to the touch, and the smoke was getting thicker. Calla stumbled, her eyes stinging. Strong hands grabbed her arm, Harlan, pulling her forward. They burst out into the cool morning air just as windows began exploding from the heat. "Everyone accounted for?" Locke demanded, counting heads as they regrouped at a safe distance. Relief washed over her face as all responded. They watched helplessly as the barn was consumed. Fire trucks were already responding, their sirens growing closer, but it was clear they'd arrived too late to save much evidence. "This was planned," Harlan said, grimly. "They knew we were coming." Calla clutched the laptop to her chest, hoping its hard drive might survive. "They can't have known about the warrants. The judge only signed them hours ago. Unless someone in the department tipped them off," Locke added, her expression dark. "We've got more corrupt officers than just Riddick." The first fire truck arrived, crews jumping into action. But the barn was fully involved now, flames reaching high into the lightning sky. Years of evidence were disappearing in the inferno. "What did we manage to save?" Calla asked. Locke spread out the papers she'd grabbed on the hood of her cruiser. Shipping manifests, mostly. Dates and destinations, but no names. Still, it proves animals were being moved through here. "The laptop might give us more," Harlan added. "If it's not too damaged." A second explosion rocked the barn, sending everyone ducking for cover. When they looked up, the entire structure was collapsing in on itself. "They really didn't want us finding anything," Calla said softly. "No," Locke agreed. "But they made a mistake. This fire, this destruction. It proves there was something here worth hiding, something big enough to burn for." More emergency vehicles were arriving. Fire investigators, additional police units. The scene was quickly becoming crowded as the sun rose fully above the horizon. Locke gathered them close. "This isn't over. We still have the shelter, and we still have Kite. Whatever they were trying to hide here, he's connected to it, and now we have proof of their desperation." Calla watched as firefighters continued battling the blaze, their efforts now focused on preventing it from spreading to the surrounding woods. The smell of smoke clung to her clothes, a reminder of how close they'd come to disaster. "We should get this evidence secured," Harlan said, gesturing to their meager salvage. "Before anything else happens to it." They carefully packed everything into evidence bags, documenting the condition and circumstances of recovery. The laptop went into a special protective case, destined for the digital forensics lab. As they prepared to leave, Calla took one last look at the smoldering ruins. Someone had been willing to destroy everything to keep their secrets. The question was, what secrets could be worth this much destruction? The answer, she suspected, lay with a small puppy waiting in a shelter cage. Whatever Kite had witnessed, whatever his presence threatened to reveal, it was big enough to burn for, big enough to kill for. And they were getting closer to the truth. Through the chaos of the fire, a sound cut through the roar of flames and shouts of firefighters, a bark, distant but distinct. Calla's head snapped up. "Did you hear that?" she asked, grabbing Harlan's arm. There it was again, coming from inside the burning structure. Her blood ran cold as realization hit. "Kite! They must have moved him here!" The words tumbled out as she started forward. Harlan caught her shoulder. "Calla, you can't go in there. The whole place is about to come down." But she was already shrugging off her jacket, mind racing. "They brought him here to destroy all the evidence at once. I'm not letting them succeed." Before anyone could stop her, she darted toward a section of wall where the flames weren't as intense. Her veterinary bag bounced against her hip. She never went anywhere without it. Now she was grateful for that habit. "Calla!" Locke's shout followed her as she ducked inside. The heat hit her like a physical wall. Smoke burned her eyes and throat as she dropped low, crawling beneath the worst of it. Another bark guided her deeper into the inferno. Through the haze, she made out a familiar shape. Kite's transport crate, pushed against the far wall. The puppy's scared face peered through the bars. "I'm coming, boy," she called, voice hoarse from the smoke. A crash behind her made her jump. Harlan had followed her in. "You're crazy, you know." "That!" he shouted over the roar of flames. "Let's get him and get out!" They reached the crate together. The metal was hot but not scalding. Calla's fingers fumbled with the latch as Harlan kept watch. "Hurry!" he urged as another section of roof collapsed nearby. The latch finally gave. Kite leaped into Calla's arms, trembling but unhurt. She tucked him inside her shirt for protection. "Go!" Harlan pushed her toward their exit. But as they turned, a burning beam crashed down between them. Harlan dove to avoid it, but more debris followed. Horror froze Calla in place as she saw him pinned beneath a fallen support beam. "Get out!" he yelled, struggling to free himself. "Take the dog, and go." Instead, Calla dropped beside him, setting Kite down. "Hold still," she ordered, pulling supplies from her medical bag. Working quickly, she used a large syringe to inject lidocaine around where the beam pressed into his leg. Within seconds, the local anesthetic would dull the pain. "What are you doing?" Harlan coughed. "Treating you like any other trapped animal," she replied, now wrapping compression bandages around his thigh as a makeshift tourniquet. "This will hurt, but it's better than burning." Using her stethoscope handle as a lever and her bag as a fulcrum, she created enough lift for Harlan to drag himself free. Blood soaked his pant leg, but her quick field treatment had prevented worse damage. "Can you walk?" He nodded grimly, leaning on her shoulder as they stumbled toward safety. Kite stayed close to their heels, leading them through the thickening smoke. The heat was becoming unbearable. Calla's lungs burned with every breath. Behind them, more of the structure groaned and shifted. "Almost there," she gasped, seeing a faint rectangle of light ahead. The exit seemed miles away. A deafening crack above made them lunge forward. The entire roof was giving way. They half ran, half fell the final few steps, bursting out into open air, just as the building collapsed, completely. The force of it knocked them to the ground. Calla felt Harlan's arms wrap protectively around her as debris rained down. Kite pressed against her side, whimpering. When the dust settled, hands were pulling them up, voices shouting questions. Emergency medical technicians swarmed around them, checking for injuries. "I'm fine," Calla insisted between coughs. "Help Harlan." His leg. But Harlan waved them off too. "Just some cuts and bruises, thanks to our resident veterinary hero here." He squeezed her shoulder. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Probably both," she admitted, hugging Kite close. The puppy's tail wagged weakly as he licked her smoke-stained face. Locke appeared through the crowd, relief and anger warring on her face. "You two are certifiable, you know that?" "But," she smiled slightly, "good work getting him out. He's too important to lose." Paramedics insisted on checking them over, cleaning Harlan's leg wound and giving them oxygen for smoke inhalation. Calla kept Kite on her lap the whole time, unwilling to let him out of her sight again. "How did you know he was in there?" Locke asked as they were being treated. "I didn't. Not for sure," Calla admitted. "But it made sense. They needed to eliminate all evidence at once. What better way than staging an accident that would destroy both the physical evidence and the one witness who could connect it all?" Harlan nodded. "They didn't count on anyone being crazy enough to run into a burning building after him. Or skilled enough to perform a field rescue," Locke added, eyeing Harlan's bandaged leg. "Those vet skills came in handy." Calla stroked Kite's head, feeling his steady breathing against her chest. Every life is worth saving. Human or animal, when they're in danger, you do what needs to be done. The fire crews were still working to fully extinguish the blaze, but the barn was a total loss. Yet, watching the smoke rise into the morning sky, Kala felt a fierce satisfaction. They'd failed to destroy their most important piece of evidence. Kite was safe. More than that, she'd discovered something about herself in those burning moments. When it mattered most, she hadn't hesitated. Fear hadn't stopped her from doing what was right. That knowledge felt like armor against whatever challenges still lay ahead. Harlan caught her eye, his expression full of gratitude and something else. Respect, maybe even awe. "Thank you," he said simply. "I wouldn't be here without you." She smiled, exhausted but content. That's what partners do. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a sharp contrast to the smoky chaos of the night before. Kala stood in front of the county courthouse, watching as police cruisers pulled up to the curb. Her heart pounded as officers led Cassandra Greer out in handcuffs. The former shelter director's perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her designer suit wrinkled from a night in holding. The cold mask of authority had cracked, revealing fear beneath. Their eyes met briefly as Greer was escorted past. This time Kala didn't look away. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Mara Locke appeared beside her, arms crossed. "We found the financial records in her private safe. Everything tied back to Commissioner Riddick. Breeding contracts, falsified euthanasia reports, proof of kickbacks. The whole corrupt system laid bare." Kala nodded, watching Greer disappear into the courthouse. "How many animals died to protect their scheme?" "Too many," Locke replied grimly. "But thanks to you and Kite, it stops now." "Speaking of," she smiled, "there's someone I'd like you to meet." They walked to a nearby park where a young girl sat on a bench, her leg braces glinting in the morning sunday. Kite lay at her feet, his tail thumping gently against the ground. "This is my niece, Sarah," Locke said softly. "She's been waiting for a service dog for 2 years, when I saw Kite's training records in the evidence files." The girl looked up, her face bright with joy as she scratched behind Kite's ears. The nervous, traumatized puppy Kala had first met was transformed, calm, attentive, perfectly in tune with his new charge. "He's amazing," Sarah said. "Watch this." She dropped her pencil, and Kite immediately retrieved it, placing it carefully in her hand. Tears pricked at Kala's eyes. "That's what he was meant for all along. A helper, a protector, just like you," a familiar voice said behind her. Kala turned to find Harlan approaching, walking with a slight limp but otherwise recovered from his injuries. He carried a thick folder under his arm. "The indictments just came down," he reported. "Riddick, 3 county officials, half a dozen shelter employees. The breeding ring stretched across 4 states. It'll take months to unravel it all." "Good," Locke said firmly. "I didn't spend a year undercover for anything less than total exposure." Sarah called Kite to her side, preparing to practice more assistance tasks. The puppy moved with confident purpose, clearly thriving in his proper role. "The shelter board asked me to take over as interim director," Harlan continued, turning to Kala. "Clean house, implement real reforms, but I can't do it alone." He took a deep breath. "I need a partner, someone with medical expertise, unwavering ethics, and the courage to stand up for what's right." Kala's pulse quickened. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you everything." His voice grew husky. "The job, yes, but also this." He gestured between them. "Us, if you want it. These past weeks, working with you, watching you risk everything to save one life, it showed me what real strength looks like, what love looks like." She stared at him, stunned. "Harlan, I know it's sudden," he hurried on, "and maybe I'm crazy, but when that building was burning around us, all I could think was that I couldn't lose you. Not when I'd finally found someone who makes me want to be better, braver, more." Locke cleared her throat. "I'll just take Sarah for some ice cream." She winked at Kala as she helped her niece up, Kite following dutifully. Alone now, Kala studied Harlan's face, the earnest hope in his eyes, the nervous set of his jaw. She thought about all they'd been through together, the betrayals and reconciliation, danger and triumph. Somewhere along the way, Trust had bloomed into something deeper. "It's not sudden," she said finally. "Not really. We've been building toward this since that first day with Kite. You helped me find my purpose again, my home." His smile lit up his whole face. "Is that a yes?" "To which part?" she teased. "All of it." He stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Stay. Work with me. Love me. Help me make this shelter what it always should have been, a place of hope and healing." Calla's heart felt full enough to burst. "Yes," she whispered, "to all of it." He pulled her close, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. Around them the morning buzzed with new beginnings. Justice served, wrongs being righted, lives transformed. Across the park, she could see Kite walking proudly beside Sarah, his white paw flashing in the sunlight. He had found his true calling, just as Calla had found hers. Sometimes the path to purpose led through darkness, but the light waiting on the other side made it all worthwhile. Harlan squeezed her hand. "Ready to get to work, partner?" She squeezed back, smiling. "Always." Together they walked toward their future, leaving the shadows of corruption behind. Ahead lay countless animals to save, wrongs to right, and a love to nurture. It wouldn't always be easy, but they would face it together. That was all that mattered. The county courthouse loomed before Calla, its stone columns casting long shadows in the morning light. She smoothed her navy blazer, took a deep breath, and climbed the steps. Inside, the marble halls echoed with her footsteps as she made her way to courtroom 3. Deputy Locke met her at the door, her expression determined. "Ready?" Calla nodded, though her stomach churned. "As I'll ever be." The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, while uniformed officers lined the walls. Cassandra Greer sat at the defense table, perfectly composed in an expensive grey suit. When she caught Calla's eye, her lips curved in a cold smile. "The state calls Dr. Calla Whitford," the prosecutor announced. Walking to the witness stand, Calla felt the weight of every stare. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and settled into the hard wooden chair. The questioning started simply enough. Her credentials, her role at the shelter, the day she first noticed Kite's brass tag. But when Greer's attorney rose for cross-examination, his voice dripped with condescension. "Dr. Whitford, isn't it true you were merely a temporary employee, with no authority to question shelter policies?" Calla's hands trembled in her lap, but her voice stayed steady. "My medical license and ethical obligations supersede any temporary status. And yet you took it upon yourself to interfere with standard procedures." "I prevented the illegal destruction of evidence," Calla corrected him. "There was nothing standard about using euthanasia to cover up criminal activity." The attorney's face reddened. "Isn't it possible you simply misunderstood normal shelter operations? Perhaps your emotional attachment to one animal clouded your judgment." Calla sat straighter, remembering every falsified record, every threatened animal, every attempt to silence her. "No. What I understood perfectly was a systematic abuse of power that treated lives as disposable. That's not emotional. It's criminal." From the gallery, she heard Harlan's quiet, "That's my girl." The defense tried another angle. "Your driving record shows 3 speeding tickets in the past 5 years. You've changed jobs 4 times. Hardly a pattern of stability or reliability, wouldn't you say?" Before the prosecutor could object, Calla leaned forward. "If you're suggesting I'm unstable because I refuse to stay quiet about corruption, then yes, I'm guilty. I will always be guilty of choosing right over easy and truth over convenience." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Greer's confident smirk faltered. Then Locke took the stand, producing a small recorder. "Your Honor, I submit into evidence recordings made during my undercover investigation." Greer's face went ash, white as her own voice filled the courtroom, calmly discussing how to disappear evidence and silence witnesses. The recordings went on, each one more damning than the last. By the time the day ended, Calla's voice was hoarse from testifying, but her spine was steel. Gone was the drifting relief vet who doubted her place. In her place stood a woman who knew exactly who she was, and what she stood for. As they left the courthouse, Locke squeezed her shoulder. "You did good in there. Really good." "We all did," Calla replied, watching Greer being led away in handcuffs. "The truth has a way of coming out, doesn't it?" The setting sun painted the courthouse steps golden. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more battles for justice. But today, Calla had found her voice, and she would never be silent again. Commissioner Riddick stood at the podium outside the courthouse, his polished smile still in place despite the mounting pressure. A crowd of supporters flanked him, including 3 state senators who had rushed to his defense. "These accusations are nothing more than a witch hunt," he declared, adjusting his expensive tie. "My record of public service speaks for itself." But even as he spoke, federal agents were moving through the crowd. In their hands were thick folders, documents that Harlan had secretly collected over years of witnessing suspicious activities. Commissioner August Riddick, the lead agent announced, cutting through his speech. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The politician's smile finally cracked. "This is absurd. I have friends in the governor's office?" The agent held up a paper trail of illegal donations and kickbacks. "These records show exactly where your friend's money went, and where it came from." Riddick's eyes darted to Harlan, who stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. The animal control officer met his gaze steadily, years of silent observation and careful documentation having led to this moment. The handcuffs clicked shut around Riddick's wrists. His supporters scattered like leaves in the wind, the senators suddenly nowhere to be seen. As agents led him down the courthouse steps, his carefully constructed facade of power crumbled completely. "You'll regret this," he snarled at Harlan. "All of you will." But his threats rang hollow now. The mighty Commissioner Riddick, who had seemed untouchable for so long, was finally facing justice. His tailored suit couldn't hide the slump of defeat in his shoulders as he was placed in the waiting police car. Calla parked her car outside a cheerful yellow house with a well-tended garden. Deputy Locke's niece, 12-year-old Sarah, was already running down the front path with Kite trotting faithfully by her side. "Dr. Whitford," Sarah called out, her face bright with joy. "Look what Kite can do now." Calla watched as Sarah demonstrated the commands they'd been practicing. Kite sat, stayed, and healed perfectly. But these weren't just tricks. Each movement was purposeful, part of his service dog training. Suddenly, Sarah's expression changed. Her hands started trembling slightly, and her eyes took on a distant look. Before Calla could react, Kite was already in motion. He pressed against Sarah's legs, guiding her gently to sit on the grass. Within seconds, the seizure warning signs Kite had detected began to manifest more clearly. Tears welled in Calla's eyes as she watched the dog she'd saved now saving someone else. Kite stayed pressed against Sarah, providing stability and comfort until the episode passed. This was what he had been trained for before being stolen, this perfect, life-saving connection with a child who needed him. Deputy Locke appeared beside Calla, squeezing her shoulder. "This is why we couldn't let them win," she said softly. "This right here." Sarah was already recovering, her hand buried in Kite's fur as he licked her face. The dog that had almost died in a shelter cage was now fulfilling his true purpose, protecting this young girl's future, one alert at a time. "He was always meant for this," Calla whispered, her heart full. "He just needed someone to believe in him." Sarah's mother brought out lemonade, and they all settled on the porch swing. Calla watched as Kite remained alert but relaxed at Sarah's feet, exactly where he needed to be. The transformation from that terrified shelter dog to this confident service animal still amazed her. "Remember when you used to drive between 3 different clinics?" Harlan asked softly, his hand finding hers. "Never staying in one place too long?" Calla nodded, feeling the weight of how much had changed. "I was running from commitment, afraid to put down roots. And now?" Harlan's eyes crinkled with warmth. "Now I know what I meant to do." She shared their vision for the first time. "We could build something different, a clinic that's also a safe haven, somewhere to protect evidence animals, give them a chance at justice." Harlan squeezed her hand, already working on the permits. Calla felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Sarah reading a book, Kite's head resting on her lap. Standing up, she walked over and knelt beside them. For one last time, she buried her fingers in Kite's fur, remembering that crucial moment in the shelter when she'd refused to give up on him. "You're exactly where you belong now," she whispered to Kite, then gently placed his leash in Sarah's hand. The girl beamed, and Calla knew with absolute certainty this was where she belonged too. This was her purpose, her home, her future. No more running, no more doubt. She had found her path, and it led right here, to justice, to love, and to the courage to stand firm for what was right. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.